Hi, now we're going to talk about using Aristotle's Poetics to interpret a text. We're going to use it as a form of literary criticism. And Aristotle's Poetics is actually the earliest text that is a form of literary criticism. It gives us the tools we need to analyze a text. So let's start off with reversal of the situation. When we look at a simple children's story, where the wild things are, we have to look at the conditions at the beginning of the play, or sorry, the beginning of the story in this case. The beginning of this story, we find Max running around the house like crazy. We find him and his mother having an altercation, and we find Max going to bed without his supper. At the end of the story, we find Max longing for home, coming home into his room. He has supper there, and it's hot. Now, one of the things that we can imply that his supper is there, that his mom maybe felt bad about sending him to bed without his supper. So here's his supper. It's there, and it's still warm for him. That there is some concern. All has been forgiven, we can say. So do we have a reversal of the situation? Yes, we do. The conditions of the story are now transformed into their opposite, reversal of the situation. Complication. If you remember, complication is that thing which sets the story in motion. All that extends from the beginning of action, that which marks the turning point to good or bad fortune. In Where the Wild Things Are, the complication is Max talked back to his mother. When his mother called him Wild Thing for running around the house, he looked at her and said, "I'll eat you up." That's the complication. Because he talked back to his mother, now he's in trouble. So that's what set our story in motion. Where does the unraveling begin? Unraveling begins from the beginning of change to the end. And in this story, it's very, very clear. In Where the Wild Things Are, we find that night Max's room is growing into a forest. It's starting to change. Max changes. Now he's the head of the wild things. So we see this change, and the unraveling occurs until the end of the story. Next, we have recognition. Recognition, we know, is a movement from ignorance to knowledge. And in this simple children's story, we have to wonder, does Max learn anything? Indeed, Max does learn something. After Max and the wild things have the wild rumpus, Max sends the wild things to bed without their supper. And when he's alone by himself, it says that he's king of all the wild things, but he was lonely and he wanted to be where someone loved him best of all. That's his recognition. He recognized his own loneliness. He recognized his need for love. What about catharsis? Do we find that purification or cleansing in reading such a simple story like that? If you remember, catharsis involves two elements, pity and fear. Pity is unmerited misfortune. Now, looking at this from a grown-up's perspective, we say, well, Max was talking back to his mom, so of course he's in trouble. But this story is not written for adults. This story is actually written for children. And as children identify with the protagonist, with Max, here's Max. He gets in trouble. I mean, he's just playing. He's running around the house, and now he doesn't get a supper. Do we feel bad for Max? Yes, we do. Unmerited misfortune. Fear. Aristotle says fear is, this misfortune that could happen to a man like ourselves. So could this happen to a man like ourselves? Well, as adults, no, this isn't going to happen to us because nobody's going to send us to bed without our supper. But as children, though, and if you're reading this as a child, yeah, your parents control the food source in the house. And what if you got sent to bed without supper? So as a child, it is a very real fear. So as a child's book, this does contain an element of catharsis. Finally, we have plot type, simple or complex. And if you remember, if it's a simple plot, it does not contain recognition or reversal. A complex plot contains both recognition and reversal. This simple child story, Where the Wild Things Are, is indeed a complex plot. It contains both recognition and reversal of the situation. I challenge you to try this on maybe another children's story, maybe something simple like a Disney movie, and then start moving into other movies and stories and seeing where you can apply these terms. And be sure to ask yourselves the questions, that were asked in the previous video, and if you're in my class, on the handout.